SpectreVision Radio.
My name is Alex. I'm a lead programmer here at the Philosophical Research Society. Tonight, we are very, very pleased to welcome back SpectreVision. SpectreVision are an interdisciplinary production group run by Elijah Wood, Daniel Noah, and Lawrence Ingley. They do film distribution and production, everything from Mandy, Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, Color Out of Space. They have an award-winning game called Transference that's on Ubisoft, and a new comic book coming out this fall, imprint coming out this fall called High Strangeness, which is going to produce tons of incredible work, I'm sure. The podcast network, SpectreVision Radio, which this night is a part of, is being recorded. All of your laughs and sighs will be preserved for eternity. But the radio roster features an array of shows at the intersection between arts and esoterica, and incredible stuff. And our guest tonight is Danny Sheehan. Danny Sheehan, yes. One of the most acclaimed attorneys in modern American history, with cases that include the Pentagon Papers, Watergate, you might have heard of it, Iran-Contra, and Wounded Knee, as well as Karen Gay Silkwood versus Kerr McGee Corporation, which led to the Oscar-winning film Silkwood, starring Meryl Streep. But his most important work is in the field of UAP disclosure. Since being appointed as an independent investigator into the UFO phenomenon by the Carter administration in 1977, Sheehan has been diligently collecting information and piecing together narratives for nearly 5 decades. Through his New Paradigm Institute in Washington, he now works directly with Congress to author legislation that protects whistleblowers and compels full accountability from both public institutions and private contractors involved in UAP programs. And next month, SpectreVision Radio will premiere a brand new video podcast with Danny called Danny Sheehan, Full Disclosure, UFOs, Aliens, and Cover-Ups. Danny will join SpectreVision Radio's Daniel Noah for a live conversation walking through Danny's personal history with the UFO and alien presence in America. Prepare for ontological shock, everybody. You've never heard anything like what you're going to hear tonight. With that, enjoy.
Hello.
Very far out. This is cool.
How did you first become interested in this topic?
Well, this topic has got so many different dimensions to it. The initial experiences that I had was when I was really small. I remember when I first discovered what stars were, that they were actually other suns. And I just assumed, at the age of 5 or 6, that they had planets going around them. I discovered that, our Earth goes around the sun, and that therefore there are other planets that go around these other stars. And then I started realizing that there must be people on these other planets because there's so many of them everywhere. When I got old enough, my mother allowed me to stay out a little bit. It was getting dark, to sit in the yard and watch the stars come out. I would kind of pick out a star, and I realized early on that you can tell the difference between stars and planets because the planets are just this constant beam of light, but the stars twinkle and they pulse like that. And so I would try to pick out a star, a really bright star, and just sit and watch it pulse from red to silver to green. And I was just going, wow, there's probably people sitting in the field in their house, or outside of their house on that planet, looking out into their nighttime sky and seeing our star and kind of reaching out to us and kind of wonder about how absolutely extraordinary this experience is. And so I decided that I would become an astronaut. I was originally going to be an astronomer, then I found out I had to have a lot of math. And I didn't want to do it. I could do it, but I didn't like it. And so I said, I found out that in 1954 there was going to be a United States Air Force Academy I would go to the Air Force Academy and become a pilot and then become an astronaut, and I would get to go out into space and I would get to meet some of these other beings. So I spent my time doing the things that I needed to do. I took all the right courses, I did all the right sports, did all the extracurricular, and ended up being the #1 candidate in the state of New York for the senatorial appointment. I grew up in Lake George, up in the Adirondack Mountains, 100 miles from the Canadian border, up in the woods. I came down to New York City and interviewed with Senator Jacob Javits, who was the Republican senator. He asked me why I wanted to go to the Air Force Academy, and I told him. I said, I want to go because I want to become an astronaut. And he said, why do you want to be an astronaut? And I said, because this is going to be the most extraordinary period in our human history. We're going to get to go out into outer space and get to meet other beings from other star systems. And he just looked at me and said, you actually believe that there's other people out on other stars in the galaxy? And I said, well, sure. I said, so do you. You're a United States Senator. I said, you've got to know that. And he was kind of flabbergasted that I would talk to him like that. But he confessed that he'd already given the appointment to the son of his chief financial supporter and said, well, that's the way it really is, Dan. That's how things really go. But I'll give you the appointment to the Naval Academy, the senatorial appointment. And I said, I'm not into boats. I'm into airplanes. I want to go to be a pilot. I said, I'll just go down and get the congressional appointment from my congressman. He said, who is your congressman? I said, it's Carlton King. He said, oh, I know Carlton King. I'll give him a call. He said, I'll have him give you his appointment, who was #7 in our congressional district competition. I ended up going to Harvard College instead. I said that the government isn't working exactly right. This isn't how it's supposed to be. And so what I need to do is become a lawyer. I'll try to work helping get our government back in tune, and then I'll get back to becoming an astronaut and get to meet the people from outer space. I got out practicing law and ended up being recruited by the Jesuit headquarters in Washington, D.C., and become general counsel in their social ministry office, which was designing public policy positions relating to all 15 of the major cabinet positions in the federal government and all 8 of the major agencies. And we were doing litigation out of that office so that we could be kept up to date on all the issues. And that's how I got contacted just after President Carter was elected in 1976. He had seen a UFO, as it turns out, back when he was governor in Georgia. Not like some little dancing light far in the sky somewhere, but like the length of a football field away, right at treetop level. He and 11 other guys that were at this Lions Club meeting, and they went out on the porch for a smoke. Back in those days, cigarettes, I mean, back in those days, and they saw he saw the UFO, and so when he was elected in November of 1976, one of the first things he did is he sent for the head of the CIA, and had him come down to Plains, Georgia, to brief him on the UFO issue. Well, it turns out that the head of the CIA in November of 1976 was George H.W. Bush. Bush refused to tell him about what they knew about UFOs. He said, you don't have any need to know. So President Carter contacted the head of the Science and Technology Division of the House of Representatives and asked him, a Democrat at that time, to task the Congressional Research Service, which is this big group of 100 scholars in different areas, to do the research and to find out what all the documentation was and the evidence that we had about the UFO phenomenon, and what connection it might have to any extraterrestrial life form. So that's got contacted by Dr. Marcia Smith, who was the head of the Science and Technology Division of the Library of Congress's Congressional Research Service, and asked to become special counsel to that investigation. She'd contacted me and asked me to get in touch with the Vatican to see if we could get access to the Vatican archives.
Why the Vatican?
Well, the Vatican, for over 1,500 years, was the repository of basically all major information in the world, except for the Library at Alexandria, which got sacked and burnt. So the Vatican archives actually has tens of thousands of manuscripts and notes and memos and diaries and things in it that are contemporaneous with the times. I suspected they would have something there as well.
On the UFO.
The issue of extraterrestrial life.
How do you know they do?
Well, because there were reports about it, and that there were some fairly famous debates that had taken place at various councils, Council of Trent and the Council of Nicaea, some places where they would have discussions about other worlds. It's what it's called, the other world discussion. And so there were records, pieces of it around about the discussions they'd had about this. So you knew they had it.
But these were records of speculative discussions.
Yes.
How do you know that they have more material evidence of UFOs and non-human
Well,
intelligence?
what it really was, I knew that they must have information about it because it had leaked out in these other documents. It had leaked out that there were these discussions going on about it. So I knew they had something more there.
And when you contacted them as a representative of the Carter administration.
Well, no, actually, as general counsel for the Jesuit headquarters in the social ministry office.
But in that capacity, you had been appointed.
Yes, I told them that we were working with President Carter and had been asked to do this, and they said no, they weren't going to give it to us. So I wrote a second time saying, I must not have made myself clear here, that we're Jesuit headquarters, contacting you here. We're the largest order in the entire Catholic Church, and that the President of the United States wants to have this, and we're trying to cooperate with them. And so they said no, again. And so...
Sorry, so the no feels almost as significant as the yes.
Yeah, it wasn't that, we don't have anything,
Right.
we don't know what you're talking about. It was just, no, you're not getting access to anything here about it. So I ended up telling Marcia Smith, look, if I'm going to do this, I want to have access to some of the information that we're getting. So then she said, what do you want? And that's how I got access to the classified portions of Project Blue Book, which was a major top secret study by the United States Air Force that went on from like 1952 up to 1967, looking into UFOs. And it just lied to everybody and said, that there's nothing to it. These are just flocks of birds or, searchlights bouncing off clouds and people
Swamp
thought.
gas.
Swamp gas, they had that one too. However, there was a classified portion of Project Blue Book, which they lied about and kept completely secret. And there were over 700 cases in there that it was absolutely impossible to explain away, even with complete bullshit stories. Well, the bottom line is they ended up saying yes.
Why do you think they said yes?
It's peculiar as to why they did that. Because they shipped the stuff up. They shipped the stuff up to Washington.
The classified portion.
Yeah.
Of
Blue
Do you
Book.
think it was just like some cleark somewhere just didn't understand that she wasn't supposed to?
No, because they sent guards with it. They had 4 guards. They had 2 of them at the very front door of the Madison building. They brought them and put them in the basement of the Madison building. The brand new building that had been built is the extension of the Library of Congress. As I mentioned to you earlier, there was nobody in it. It was brand new. It just got through building the building. So when I showed up, I was asked to bring 2 forms of photo ID to come to the Madison building on the Saturday morning. And so I went there, and here these 2 great big suits standing in the door, and kind of grumped and looked at my ID and stuff and told me to go on in. And so I go into the building, this big empty building with nobody in it, kind of walked down the hall, and they said, go on down the hall, get in the elevator, go on down to the basement, and you'll see the room down there. So I go in, and I get in the elevator, and I start going down, and I just got this instinct to open up my briefcase. I had my blue pinstripe suit on in my briefcase, looking very lawyerly. I took out a yellow pad and just stuck it under my arm, kind of lengthwise, and closed up my briefcase and got off the elevator. And I looked down the hall, and I saw the light on down in this room down there. So I walk all the way down there, and here are these 2 other great big suits there hanging out, very unhappy to see me. like who the hell was I that got to look at these things? And so that they said, you can't bring anything in there with you. Put that briefcase down. You can't bring it in. You can't take any notes. You can't make any recordings. And so I just put my briefcase down, and I walked into this room. And it was a room about maybe 20 feet wide and about 10 feet deep or so, and had these folding card tables with these big shoeboxes. They were like big light green, kind of government green shoebox-like things with these little string ties on them. And so in a microfiche machine. real high tech. You had to crank it with your hand. So I started looking for photos. And I opened up one of the shoe boxes and took out the little canister first, the film, put it into the machine and cranked and started one document after another, after another, after another. And I was looking for the photos to start with. And after about the third or so canister of these things, I hit it. And there were these photos of a UFO. And there were these photos of a UFO. Wasn't any doubt about what it was. It had crashed. You could see that it had hit the snow-covered field, and it had plowed this big, huge dirt gouge in trench right across the field, and it was stuck in the side of this big snow-covered embankment, just like sticking at this 45
How big was it?
It was like about probably 30, 35 feet wide, 40 feet wide maybe. The saucer part of this had the big dome on the top of it. And it was stuck in there at this 45-degree angle, and there were like 3 or more pictures of it. So I was looking through the photos, and suddenly I realized that along the bottom of the dome, there were these symbols. And I went, holy shit. I said, look at this. I said, they're not Chinese, they're not Russian, not hieroglyphics, they're just some totally weird symbols. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy them. And so what I did is I took the yellow pad out and opened it up. And I still don't know exactly why I did it that way, but I did. I just opened it up to the inside cardboard backing of the yellow pad, and I slid that cardboard in underneath the microfiche, and I focused it down so it fit right onto the cardboard, and I traced absolutely detailed, perfect, each one of these symbols all the way around the lower edge of the dome. And I closed up the yellow pad like this, and I said, fuck, I better get out of here. So I closed up the yellow pad, and I put all the film canisters back in there and tied them all back up, and just got up, put my jacket back on, and just walked right out the door, and leaned down and picked up my briefcase and just started down the hall. And I got, half a dozen steps down the hall, and all of a sudden one of the guys said, Sheehan, what the hell you got there? And I went, oh, my briefcase. No, under your arm. What's that? And I said, oh, this is it's just a yellow pad. And he came over, both of them came over, and one of them loomed up over me, and the guy yanked it away from me and ruffled through all the pages, and of course there was nothing on them. And so he just handed it back to me. And so I just put it back under my arm and walked down the hall, got into the elevator, went on up and went out, got into the Blue Flame, which was this little old Ford Falcon we had at the Jesuit headquarters, and drove back over to the headquarters and went in to see Father Bill Davis, who was my superior at the time. And I showed it to him, and he went, well, and he leaned down and he slides open the drawer on his desk, and he brings out this little 8.5 by 11 manila folder. I opened it up and I slid out this 8.5 by 11 black and white glossy photo of a UFO in flight. I said, where did you get this? And he said, my sister Dodie gave it to me. And I said, where'd Dodie get it? And he said, she got it from Mike, her husband, who is the chief air traffic controller at the Seattle airport. And I said, well, where did Mike get it? He said, well, he got it from his best friend, who's a commercial pilot that flies cargo all around up over the Northwest. And he took this photograph right through the window of his plane. And then when he brought it to the drugstore back in those days, you'd bring the film to the drugstore and they would develop. He said once he realized what he had, he didn't want to get in trouble. And he didn't want to report it to anybody. And so he said, what I'll do is I'll bring it to my best friend, Mike, who's the air traffic controller here at Seattle Airport, and give it to him. And then I won't get in trouble. And then when Mike got it, Mike didn't want to get in trouble. And so he took it and gave it to his wife, Dodie. And he said, here, take this, bring it to your brother. He's a priest. So there you have it. Why is it that a priest would be somebody that they would think cared about UFOs? Why would they think a priest is an appropriate person to bring that to? What I discovered is that the profound philosophical and theological and metaphysical questions that are posed to our human family by suddenly realizing that the common feature of all of the worldviews, the entire octave of human worldviews that our human family adhere to, the political manifestations of which are from right to left, the authoritarian, reactionary, conservative, moderate, liberal, progressive, or utopian worldviews, all of them share one thing in common, and that is they all believe that we are the only highly developed, sentient, intelligent life in the entire universe. And we're saying, okay, trouble is on the way, because you're going to discover that that isn't true. And this is going to be more profoundly earth-shaking than discovering that the earth isn't in the center of the universe. Back when that happened in the 15th century with Galileo and Copernicus, and everybody got their nose out of joint about that. And so the fact is there's a big shakeup coming here once people really come to grips with this.
You said a couple things that I want to ask you about. One was the pilot took a picture of a UFO.
Didn't want to get in trouble.
Didn't want to get in trouble.
That's right.
Where does that come from?
It turns out that, and this has been now confirmed by Richard Dolan, who was a PhD historian at UPenn, and he was writing his PhD thesis in history on the history of the UFO phenomenon in the United States. And he filed a whole series of lawsuits under the Freedom of Information Act to extract out of the federal government documents that they were refusing to voluntarily turn over in compliance with the law, the Freedom of Information Act. So he extracted documents which showed that the United States Defense Department and the Central Intelligence Agency's Operations Directorate had mounted a full-scale campaign to totally discredit anybody who tried to file an official report about a UFO sighting.
Humiliate.
They would ruin their life, they would ruin their family life, they would tell their family members that they were crazy, they were mentally ill, they ought to get them psychiatrically examined and committed. They would ruin their careers. They would actually bring false criminal charges against them, make up things to get rid of them. It was an extraordinarily aggressive campaign that they had going.
And it impacted American culture.
Oh, yes.
I mean, even until very recently, the last few years, anytime a news program would dare to report on a UFO encounter, what music is played under it? Yeah. The X-Files, right? And they all laugh while they report the news.
Total ridicule.
Ridicule, yeah.
Ridicule was the actual word that was used in the memos.
So psychological warfare.
It's a psyops, against the American people to keep secret this information. And so the question arises is, keep secret what information? The fact that extraterrestrial life existed, the fact that the UFOs, at least some of them, were actual craft from an extraterrestrial civilization coming and going from our planet. What else was being kept secret? Of course, the nature of secrets is you can't tell what the secret is, but we know that they're in there.
Visit us next week for part 2 of my talk with Danny Sheehan at the Philosophical Research Society in Los Angeles, California. If you want more of Danny's stories to tide you over, jump over to his podcast, Full Disclosure with Danny Sheehan, UFOs, Aliens, and Cover-Ups, available now on SpectreVision Radio.